Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Batman v Superman is a movie for stupid people, and once you realize that, you'll be kind of okay with it. It's not really a movie for people that like plots or characters or really want to relate to those characters. It's for people who like explosions and awesome fights and people brooding and the idea of heroes and super powerful things. It's the movie for the guy who wears the heavy metal t-shirt that's all ripped up, and then you ask him about that band and he doesn't really know that much about it. He wears it more as an appearance thing than an actual thing he likes. That's kind of what this movie is for. It's all about ego and brooding. The kind of people, like, I knew these kids in high school throughout life of liking comic books as someone who would just like the idea of these evil bad guy characters and everything those evil bad guy characters represented, and would write fan fiction where they'd all get together and just do all this evil stuff. But then I'd ask, like, well, what's their plan? Why do all the supervillains want to get together to destroy the world? Like, there's probably like more to it. Like, they have an actual reason to do that. And they'd always say the same thing. No, they're evil. The cool thing is the fight. The cool thing is the battle. And the cool thing isn't the character and the story of it. If you are one of those people, Batman v Superman is like a perfect movie. And once I kind of realized what it was doing, I was kind of okay with it under that guise. Now, that isn't a great guise. That isn't how great cinema's made. That isn't how anyone likes to see a movie with a brain. But once you realize that, you're like, well, if it's just going to be stupid explosions and half-baked philosophy and brooding and such, I guess this is fine for doing that sort of thing. After the events of Man of Steel, Superman is regarded as a hero all over the world, except for by Bruce Wayne, or Batman, who doesn't like him very much because he destroyed the Wayne Enterprises building and killed many of his employees and friends, and feels that he's out of control and could destroy all of the world if possible, and we should get rid of him. If there's even a 1% chance, he could just destroy all the human beings on Earth if he wanted to. And of course, Lex Luthor is trying to get him as well, just kind of hating Superman because he hates him, which is kind of, one of those problems with this movie, but is also trying to get access to kryptonite and hopefully take down Superman as well, as the government is coming after Superman also. It's not a great day to be Superman in this movie. Well, Superman is trying to do the best he can, helping out the Earth as much as he can while trying to avoid all these people who are coming after him for the sins he made in the last movie, and eventually have an epic beatdown with Batman. This movie moves like a big, bloated blockbuster, and almost like the fear that everyone has of most blockbusters, which doesn't exist as much. Most of the time, studios try to get good filmmakers and good writers to work on big blockbusters. They did get the guy who wrote Argo to do a bunch of rewrites, Chris Terrio, but still got the same guy who's written like all this DC stuff, even the Nolan stuff, David S. Goyer, and of course let Zack Snyder run at the helm. And this very much feels like a filmmaker who we're all kind of just like stuck with and no one really has any love for. He certainly visually can make a lot of striking images, but they're images that mean like seriously nothing. He doesn't understand how to make an image matter to the narrative whatsoever. It's like he has the power to make a compelling image, but he doesn't have the power to make himself an actual good director. I know people always try to make excuses for Snyder over the years, but it's pretty clear he's all style and absolutely no substance. And this has been confirmed to me for a while, but Batman v Superman just confirms that over again. Actually, one of the first people to ever say that about him was George Romero when Zack Snyder remade Dawn of the Dead. He said, it's a fine movie, but it has none of the meaning of the original. And that's kind of how I feel about every Zack Snyder movie. I mean, I guess Sucker Punch has some meaning in it, but it's so convoluted and strange. It's really more about the images than the style. He kind of reminds me now with these DC movies almost like Michael Bay in the Transformers films. With this film, the flow of it just so weird. It keeps cutting between storylines about Lois Lane and Bruce Wayne and Batman, and then there's a Superman plotline, and then there's a Lex Luthor plotline. And these plotlines can intersect, but the way they cut between them feels almost indistinguished to flow. The story moves at such a weird pace. I almost kind of just got used to it because I realized fairly quickly that this movie is more about the mythology, which is a problem with Man of Steel. It's like it cares about the mythology mythology. It doesn't care about the character. Nothing in this movie cares about the characters at all. In fact, it's so interested in counterpointing to Marvel, it almost didn't get why Marvel's successful. Marvel isn't just successful because they have a bunch of superheroes. If that was true, every studio would launch a stupid superhero movie and everyone would see it. The reason Marvel's successful is because they have a connection to you as an audience. They really try to make those superhero movies both fun and try to appeal to you. They're very relatable characters. They're always relatable characters. They always feel like the everyman. And Batman v Superman, they're not really thinking about making any of these characters relatable. That's the whole thing, is that like Marvel is supposed to be more of the relatable characters, the everymans, and DC, it's more like Greek gods. And I think Zack Snyder plays that pretty much to that whole philosophy. I can't relate to a god. I don't know about you, but most people kind of can't because we don't live that life. And it's easier to relate to someone who's like, oh my god, how am I going to help Aunt May and pay the bills this month, than like, I've gone crazy, conservative, upset about Superman. And this film doesn't really break it down in a way that you can really get it as much. You do relate more to Batman, certainly, and the Bruce Wayne arc than Superman's arc. Part of that is because of the script, and also because Henry Cavill isn't a great Superman, frankly. He's more of putting on the show of Superman than really doing a great star turn as Superman. No one really knows who Henry Cavill is, and that's not because of our media landscapes changing. That's because his performance just really isn't there, and they never really build him well enough. Whereas I think Ben Affleck, that character, you understand the arc a little bit more. I don't necessarily think you can relate to it. I didn't really relate to it, but I understood it a lot more. The odd thing about this film is, as much as it brings into question the image of Superman, there are all these dream sequences with Batman that it almost feels like Bruce Wayne is obsessed with the image of himself, and he's obsessed with the image of this character. He's created Batman, but he's also upset of the image of this other character and how everyone portrays him. It's almost like a little hypocritical because he's almost upset that like someone else has this mythological image of himself, not understanding the counterpoint he's playing and really understanding the similarities, which they eventually do, but it takes forever. Yeah, I get the whole like Frank Miller idea, and I've read Dark Knight Returns, that like Batman and Superman probably wouldn't get along, but Batman is very much someone who understands the situations he's getting into. He's not an impulsive character. He's a detective, and he very much overthinks what he's going into. He's very well trained. He's a very smart guy, and this isn't that Batman. It's the angry, impulsive, meaner Batman. It's the Batman that you think is cool. He's not the Batman as much who's an awesome detective. And this isn't a detective story and doesn't feature that Batman. This doesn't get the real Batman, and that's the thing. It gets the images of all these characters. As much as this film kind of is about that and how these superheroes are portrayed in this world and what that means to that world and how we should bring that into question, it doesn't really think about what it's doing with the images of these characters and how it's actually important to relate to them. It's funny, while I was watching that, I was like, wow, this is like the DC Marvel argument over and over again. I think there have been good DC comics and great Batman and Superman stories, and it's not necessarily the character's fault. It's the storyteller's fault, because they're not really thinking of that. And the counterpoint to Marvel thing, I don't think anyone really gives a shit about having a different superhero universe that's so different. It's like super serious and dark and all this shit. It's not something anyone cares about. What they want is a good story. And the reason people like Guardians of the Galaxy wasn't because we all really wanted a space opera. It's because Guardians of the Galaxy was fun. And the same with Iron Man. And the reason Iron Man became such a huge star was because of that first Iron Man movie. And it's like the DC movies have never really understood that, frankly, particularly in their sequels. And this film has pretty much the same problems that all DC sequels have, where they have way too many characters. They always waste a really good character as like kind of a side thing. Bane is probably the biggest example in Batman and Robin. We're having two villains at the same time. Really, this should be the Lex Luthor villain movie. It should be this cool thing where we have an awesome Lex Luthor, but then attaching Doomsday to it kind of like takes all the punch away from it. Now, the kind of all over the place performance by Jesse Eisenberg is certainly really a problem with this movie. Casting him makes a lot of sense, actually. The whole idea of Lex Luthor being the Zuckerbergian villain is perfect for modern day, and Lex Luthor has evolved over time, whether being a scientist in the 50s or a billionaire businessman in the 80s. He's always changed changed with the times to be the correct evil Lex Luthor for the time period. And for our time period, the correct evil Lex Luthor would be like Mark Zuckerberg. But unfortunately, Jesse Eisenberg certainly just didn't get that and played it like he's in a silly comic book movie, but he's the only one playing it that way. So like, I think his idea was to play against everyone else, but it just doesn't really work. It does feel like a Joel Schumacher type of performance, but I actually think the Joel Schumacher type of performances have a better balance to them because he's trying to be dark and serious, but also doing like a silly, I'm in a comic book movie type of thing, and no one else is doing that kind of performance. It feels very off. Like, this is probably the worst performance I've ever seen from Jesse Eisenberg. It's absolutely the worst Lex Luthor I've ever seen. That's the other thing with this film, is it's not contextualizing what it's doing with these characters, which is kind of like how DC works, and any comic book or any story you're telling works the best is if you contextualize it for the modern age, and that's something DC has done many times through reboots and rebrands and so forth. And the fact that they don't really get that completely is a huge disappointment for this film. Thinking of this film as just a big empty blockbuster and just going with it made it fine while I was watching it, but once it was over, I felt exhausted, I felt tired, I felt drained, I felt like I watched a fucking Transformers movie. And that's really what this is. This is kind of just a big money blockbuster where you can't even think about how anyone was thinking artistically about it. You just think of it from a marketing angle. And this is a big movie for Warner Brothers. It really is. They really need a hit, like, very badly. That's how it comes off. It comes off as a huge studio picture. You can tell it on the screen. The action sequences look expensive. All the darkness in it, I don't think it's the most incredible sequences. There's a couple cool fights with Batman that I think are really awesome and were really thrilling, but Zack Snyder, for all his cool visuals and stuff, there's nothing like a fun, amazing action sequence as much as there really should be in a movie like this. I liked some of them, and the Batman Superman fight was fine, but there was nothing that I was like, oh yeah, but that one part, even though this movie stinks, there was nothing that blew me away. It has certain neat visuals in it and kind of striking images, but he's not really amazing at an action sequence. In fact, when I was thinking about it, it's like, even when he has an action sequence, he always has to slow it down to almost make his kind of usual kind of striking image thing. Like, he can't do it sped up in a really interesting way. And it's almost like his visuals are done in the opposite way of an insecure director, where they usually move the camera around so you can't see anything. He almost likes to show you things in perfect detail, because if he did speed things up, he wouldn't have as much to say, which he certainly doesn't. And this is not for people who really like movies. They're for people who probably only like superhero movies and don't really think about the characters or the things within them. And I think that is the kind of thing about comic books that I don't like, because I think why I like comics and why I like these stories and why I like these kinds of characters isn't just because of that goes boom, look at how awesome that is. And there's too much of that in here. And even the psychology they try to talk about is super boring and does feel like basic freshman college level kind of stuff. The whole idea of going after Superman feels like an idea that you can kind of get on, but feels so pushed throughout that they probably should have gotten over it midway through the film, but they push this whole thing towards the end of the film, which gets like very annoying after a while. You're just like, can't you guys just make up and like go on an adventure or something? The thing I like about these characters is the cool adventures they go on. I don't want to watch them brood and deal with Congress. I wish they think about like what would be fun for an audience to see. I don't think anyone's going to fall in love with it as much. I liked Ben Affleck as Batman. I think he was good at doing the kind of brooding older Batman. He's the first one to really play an older Batman. Usually each actor to play Batman is younger than the one before. This is the first one to actually be older. He brings a certain seniority to the DCU and he kind of centers it, and he's good as Batman. I think his brooding, meaner, malevolent Batman wasn't really something I'm as into. Gal Gadot is not really in it that much. I know a lot of people really loved Wonder Woman in this movie. There wasn't really that moment where I was like, oh shit, I love this character. I like Gal Gadot in this. I actually thought she was good as Wonder Woman, but there was nothing that made me go, oh shit, I have to see Wonder Woman now. The thing that's making me think that is the footage I've seen of that movie, not stuff from this character in this movie. But I think they both do a much better job than Henry Cavill, who's basically just playing a boring Superman as usual. This is the ugly side of big blockbuster movie making. It's the side that is more about the event and the explosions than the characters. And, you know, while you're watching it, you might just get into its strange rhythm, into its more explosion over character, more eventness, more stupid psychology, all the nonsense where certain characters do things you're like, why did that happen exactly? And just throwing away Doomsday, who's a character who's perfectly good to have in his own movie. We don't need to throw him in. It feels like the DC movies we've seen before, but it also feels like ugly blockbusters that are more about raising companies' bottom line. And I know all big blockbusters are, but this doesn't feel like they really want us to love these characters. That's something the audience needs if you want it to continue. And I feel like that's how Batman v Superman is kind of almost anti what most blockbusters are doing, is that they kind of understand now they have to get you to like these characters and fall in love with it. I mean, look at what happened with Star Wars recently. Everyone knew that Star Wars movie, Force Awakens, had to be good, or you weren't going to keep seeing these Star Wars movies because everyone had a bad taste in their mouth. It was corporately important. And Batman v Superman represents the kind of blockbuster that we've moved away from, where they're just trying to get you in and have a big event and have explosions and be like, you'll probably show up for the sequel, so we're fine. Marvel and Star Wars and a lot of blockbusters and even the Planet of the Apes films are really trying to make sure you will come back because you're invested. And Batman v Superman doesn't do that. It doesn't make you care. It doesn't give you the event like what they're basically trying to emulate cinematically, which was the Avengers. I don't think Batman v Superman and the DCU have done that really successfully and are ever really going to live up to the thing that they're trying to counter, because they weren't really thinking about how they were countering it. They thought of it on the surface level. They're making these characters, and that's not exactly how an audience will work. There will always be people who like dumb Superman stories where things explode, and I'm sure those people will be fine. But for the average moviegoer who just wants to see an entertaining movie and have a good time at the movies, this is kind of the ugly summer blockbuster that leaves that kind of bad taste in your mouth that you're used to with Transformers, that you're used to with Man of Steel. And this isn't kind of showing me that I want to keep going to the DCU. This is just showing me that it's going to continue to be this massive, huge event. This is more of an empty explosion event than it is a movie to love. And unfortunately, I think that's all really this movie's for, and that's all it's pandering to. So if you can view it through those eyes, it's not so bad. But if you want to view it with a brain, unfortunately, it's really a dawn to nothing. So if you have seen Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.